Hi, Steve. I see you've joined. And
Yeah.
Emily.
Get him out.
Hello.
Hello. Yeah, I tried to kind of take the attendance of committee members as folks join and on Teams, as you get a lot more attendees, it's kind of hard to kind of track that shuffling list. For those of you who just joined, we won't get started for a few more minutes. And that's okay, Steve. You know the drill. You can always follow up with me after the meeting if you want to just chat and have me fill you in. So no worries. Okay, we'll give it just another minute or two. Okay, so far, let me do a quick roll call. For PMAC members, I have Lisa, Veronica, Steve, and Emily. Has anyone else from the committee joined? Okay, we'll give it another minute. Okay, I think we can get started, everyone. So first of all, welcome to our October PMAC meeting. In keeping with the trend this year, we have a pretty packed agenda, and we have it filled with outside presenters, which means y'all won't have to listen to me talk for very long stretches of time. Second, we've provided a link to the meeting stream, as well as a call-in only option. Please use only one of these choices for audio, and also if you can remember, please mute your end when you're not speaking up, so we can minimize kind of that interference. Third, I'd like to give everyone a heads up that we are recording this meeting. And then last, a piece of committee business. So I have not received any volunteers from PMAC for the strategy work group that we discussed with Mercer last month. We did invite Uplift to have a member of their team attend the work group, and Uplift's been attending PMAC meetings and working with PEB members, so they'll provide a pretty good perspective. If we could get, one or two volunteers for PMAC, that would be great. Please let Rebecca, Teresa, or myself know. It's not a requirement. I don't want you to feel pressure either. This is kind of over and above what the committee's doing, but again, if you're interested, just please reach out. So we have a pretty full agenda, as I mentioned. We will, in a minute, review and approve June meeting minutes. We'll then share some info about this week's board meeting, as well as provide a high-level a recap of the Worksite Wellness Coordinating Council meeting that was held earlier this month. And then I will turn it over to Canopy, who will kick off our carrier presentations today. So, and about those presentations, we have asked Canopy and our medical carriers, based on our discussions in our previous meeting in August, we have asked Canopy and the medical carriers to present ideas for destigmatizing access to behavioral health and related services. And also, how do they assist members in finding the right provider for them? You know, taking into account things like race, ethnicity, LGBTQI status, etc. We will then reconvene as a group and talk about what we want to do with all this information. What are our next steps and action items? And then also, just a reminder to please speak up and ask questions. We want this to be kind of an interactive dialogue. So as the carriers are presenting, don't hesitate to speak up, raise your hand. And also, if you raise your hand and no one's noticing, feel free just to interject, because sometimes it's hard to track, you know, both the presentations and the audience. So really quickly, before we do the meeting minutes review, I would like to take one more roll call for the committee. So far, I have Lisa, Veronica, Steve, and Emily. Are there any other PMAC members who've joined? Okay. So we will move on to the minutes review. So let's spend a few minutes reviewing the meeting minutes from June. That is an attachment that Rebecca included on this meeting. I will pull it up and kind of slowly scroll through it, but if you will, for the committee members, if you're able to kind of review it quickly on your own, that is all right too. So I will begin sharing hopefully in a minute. Okay. So let's spend a couple minutes reviewing these. This is from June. We did have some combined minutes that we included in this meeting from our combined Worksite Wellness Coordinating Council and PMAC meeting in August. However, that wasn't really one where we asked for PMAC specific action items. So we will just keep our minutes review to June. And again, for the folks who follow along, I will just slowly scroll through the minutes. And if you have any questions or comments for PMAC members, just go ahead and speak up.
Hi, this is Steve, just on
Yep.
item number 2 in the minutes under the canopy presentation. The second bullet there, I was wondering if we got that. It said the council unanimously approved the recommendation to explore whether a DOJ-approved contract template can be produced specifically for agencies to purchase EAP services not included in PEB's price agreement. I was wondering if we, whether that's, we found out anything about whether that's an actual thing that could happen or not.
So long story short, yes. So we've put it on our general kind of work queue with DOJ. I have let our the attorney that handles most of our contracts know that this is something that we want to stand up that would be effective for next July 1, 2023 with the canopy renewal updates. And our plan is to start working with DOJ beginning of 23. So in about 2.5 months after we get through our renewal work. And again, the hope is we have that DOJ approved contract in place before July 1 to make those add-on services much easier to purchase for state agencies.
Great, thanks.
Yeah. A little bit longer. And just a quick update. So we have recently updated a couple of web pages to add information about EAP engagement, counting as 2 health actions. And I do believe for Oregon State employees, Oregon State has their own EAP vendor. So I believe we also put some appropriate language that's directed to Oregon State employees. And the decision is that if Oregon State employees engage with their EAP vendor, that should count as 2 health actions as well, since really EAP engagement was the focus. So let me stop sharing and I will ask the committee, any other comments or needed corrections that folks see or identify? And if not, I would be open for a motion to approve.
I make a motion to approve the June minutes from PMAC. This is Steve.
All right, Steve.
I
And
second that one. And this is
Oh.
Veronica.
All righty, so I'll do a quick roll call. Lisa,
Yep, approve.
Emily,
Is it okay for me to say approve even though I didn't attend that meeting?
you can approve or you can abstain. It's perfectly
Oh.
fine.
Okay.
No pressure.
Okay. I guess I'll abstain since I didn't attend.
That is fair. You can always provide, if you do review the minutes and you notice, something or you have comments, you can always reach us offline.
Okay.
Okay, Steve
Yes.
and Veronica.
Yes.
Okay, the minutes are approved from June. Thank you very much. So we will now move on to the next portion of the agenda, board updates and action items. I'm going to keep this brief so we can make sure our carriers and partners have their full allotted time for presentations. I thought the main presentations from this month's board meeting that would be of most interest to this group are probably the dental carrier presentations around their efforts on provider diversity and their provider networks and access. As we know from discussions in this committee and with the coordinating council, this is really an ongoing area of focus and concern. But it's also something it feels like the whole industry is really still getting its arms around, and it's an evolving area. So all of our carriers are working on this in some capacity. If you're really interested in the topic, I would suggest you visit our website. We do have the presentations up on our web that you can review. I pulled out just a nugget from each of the presentations that I thought I would share, but these are not necessarily representative of their whole presentation. So take that as you will. But Moda had mentioned they've added quite a few fields to its Find Care tool where you can look for providers based on specific criteria. They did note they have a challenge getting their providers to respond, like any insurance company that contracts with its providers. Willamette Dental noted that there's a total of 26 languages spoken, excuse me. That said, I wasn't clear if this was specifically referring to their dental professionals or if this was just generally about interpreters available. And Kaiser noted that they have real-time interpreters available for over 200 languages. So again, that's not completely representative of their entire presentation. So if you're interested, please do visit our website, and potentially in a future meeting, we can ask them and other carriers to present similar information to this group. Teresa, do you want to give a quick recap of the Coordinating Council meeting earlier this month?
Sure can. Hi, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Teresa Cross. I'm the PEB OEB Wellness Manager, and I staff the Worksite Wellness Coordinating Council. There are a couple members of that council present today because we've been inviting the PMAC and council to each other's meetings. So some of you PMAC members may have participated or attended the council meeting earlier this month. The agenda items that we reviewed at that meeting were, number one, the Canopy HR Manager Toolkit. Our goal was to try and elicit some more ideas for how that toolkit could be used and how to get it into the hands of the right people at the right time. It's been shared with HR managers, but there are probably other avenues that we could explore to make sure that, for instance, mid-level managers know what's in that toolkit and some of the other resources available to them. So the council composition didn't have a lot of HR managers. In fact, there's only one HR manager on the council. But I think what the conversation did do was to tell us that we need to do more to explore what's in that toolkit and kind of think really creatively about not just handing it to folks or sending them a link, but doing some kind of train the trainers sessions, or PEB composing some talking points around the toolkit that could be shared with managers and HR managers, just to give them a little more context and a little more information with which to view that toolkit and use it. So more to come on that. The other item that the council discussed was the well-being strategy work group. And we have two folks from the council who have been volunteered, who I shouldn't say have been volunteered, they volunteered themselves, but they've tapped themselves to be the reps for the council on that work group. PMAC, of course, will have a presence on that work group too. So we talked a little bit more about Mercer, Dr. Neldner presented a little bit more about the details of that work group, what the time commitment is, what the charge will be, and what the ultimate product will be, which is a strategy to implement the well-being framework that goes to the PEB board for final approval. And that's just one piece of several other things that are going on with that framework. And I don't know if that's on the agenda to talk about in this meeting today or not, Brian, because PMAC has seats on that work group as well. But those are the two big items that we discussed at the council meeting. And if there are any questions, I'm here to answer them.
Thank you, Teresa. Any questions from the group? Okay. So we will move into the first presentation by one of our partners will be Canopy. Before I hand it off and have them start sharing their presentation, I thought I'd give just a quick background and a quick preview of, again, what we're doing. So again, we asked our medical carriers and Canopy to present information on how, ideas for how to destigmatize or normalize access to behavioral health programs, and what the member experience is for someone who's looking for a provider, consistent with their desired gender, identity, cultural, or ethnic preferences to meet their needs. We also asked Canopy to provide a description of a member-centric experience for someone who is handed off to a medical plan where there's needed coordination, whether it's someone who is currently in treatment and needing higher levels of care, or for someone who has exhausted their session limit and is looking to continue sessions with an in-network provider. And I'll be honest, I'm not quite sure what actions we'll want to take based on all this information. So I think we'll reconvene after the last presentation and brainstorm a little bit. And I'll just ask you to share maybe your general impressions or thoughts. Ask whether this information kind of led to you thinking of any specific action items or proposals. We'll share information, and then honestly, if we can't come up with something concrete in terms of proposals or next steps, we'll probably do what we normally do, which is have myself and Teresa take this information offline, work with staff and Mercer, and prepare something to bring back to you next month for you guys to react to. So with all that said, are there any questions before I turn it over to Umberto? Not seeing any. Okay, it's all yours.
Great. Thank you, Brian. Good to be here. Hello, everyone. Let me share my screen and then start this presentation. I got to make sure I do that. Okay, so let me just do one other thing. Still getting used to this whole Teams thing. There we go. Great. So my name is Umberto Chacon. I'm the Customer Success and Business Development Executive for State of Oregon from Canopy, and I'm joined by my colleague Dave Christie, who is our Vice President of Clinical Services. So we'll talk about all the things that Brian mentioned, destigmatizing the access to this kind of care and what the member experience is like. We'll show you a little video and talk about coordinating with health plans and whatnot. So with that, let me go to the next item. So first, we provide fast and easy access for people to connect with a counselor. And that's something that we do to just help destigmatize, what they're looking for. And we also, in our promotions, do things that destigmatize. So like in this one, this flyer, you can see that we asked, do you do things for your physical fitness, like eating healthful foods and exercising? How about also boosting your mental fitness? So, we just talk about it kind of normally, right? And then we go into what are all the different services that we have available for folks, and then the fast and easy ways to contact us. And here's another one where, it's a little bit lighthearted. We try to make them kind of attention grabbing and, not seem too serious sometimes, so that way it just kind of normalizes the support that people are seeking. So let me go to the next slide here. And here we have some stats, and I want Dave to kind of tell us what we're looking at here as far as the demand for mental health support and kind of how we provide fast access. Dave, would you give us a little insight into some of these numbers?
Mary Yeager or Mary Yeager.
Oh. Hello, Dave. Not sure what's going on there.
He was muted, but I think he's working on his controls, but we don't hear you yet.
Okay, well, I'll talk a little.
Yeah, Dave, I think you're still muted. We can't hear you.
Yeah, I got a little something.
Still muted. Still muted.
Okay, I just got an alert that somebody muted me.
I
switched my microphone. Is that any better?
That works great.
That is better. And that was
Okay.
me. It showed you as muted, and I tried to unmute it probably right when you fixed it on your end.
Got it. Okay. So yes, mental and behavioral health is central to our benefit, but it's not the only element. And those other elements, I think, are critical in how we do our normalizing and destigmatizing. So all of our operations, all of our benefits are centrally accessible. Phone is probably the main access point, and we prioritize quick and easy access there. So you can see our average, actually what I just ran for this last quarter is our average is 9 seconds, but across the whole year, it's probably closer to 10. We have highs and lows, but we try to answer quickly with a live person. So especially during our business hours, this is important because our business hours are the same as most of our members. So when they call, they don't get a phone menu, they get a live person who can help them with any benefit that they want to access. Our life coaching appointments, it's a way that we kind of serve people on a subclinical level with really fast service. So they could get a same week appointment pretty easily with our coaches. Our average speed to care there is 1 to 2 days. But with our therapists, so we have licensed marriage and family therapists on our panel, licensed professional counselors, clinical social workers, and some psychologists. So when I talk about behavioral health, when I talk about counselors or clinicians, that's what I'm referring to. And our average right now from time of access to time to first appointment is 5 to 8 days. So we know that it's really difficult in this space, and we work really hard, really closely with our providers to stay on top of availability, to get members connected with providers who are available, and not have that time spent with them tracking somebody down, or if we're trying to find somebody, we take the burden of that because we can get responses from our providers usually a lot quicker and easier than our members can. So all of that goes into it, but I also want to go back to that first promotional material. So with, yes, that one. We're really mindful of the language that we use. And we have a variety of promotional materials because looking at these two examples, you can see not everything is going to reach every person. But when we construct it, we try to do so in a way that is descriptive, that is professional and consistent, but also accessible. And that's a lot to balance. But if you look at that, what Umberto read through, for example, you do things for your physical fitness. How about also boosting your mental fitness? We're mindful of that language that comes across because certain things, even putting mental health awareness, that will speak to a lot of people. For some people, that'll be a little bit weighty, right? And we specifically remove things like mental illness or problem-focused things that are detractors because we know that those things feed into stigma. So we're conscientious about that language, about how we present it, and making sure to highlight multiple services. That's another reason why in our operations, our accessibility is central. So for example, our probably second most popular benefit is our legal benefit. But people access that the same way they access mental health services or other things with a mental behavioral health focus. And that's very intentional because it's really easy for them to call for a legal service when it's needed or financial coaching when it's needed. But they're talking with the same person who can set up a therapy provider referral. And we do have clinicians on the phones. We have counselors and mental health professionals answering our phones so that they can provide immediate support right then. And oftentimes we see that that does open the doors to a clinical conversation in the moment, but also open up the possibility to proceed with the clinician from there.
Great.
And I'll pause there and see if there are any comments or reactions.
Yeah, we'll pay attention to chat here. But on the 5 to 8 days, can you tell us a little bit about some of what happens in the background to make sure that providers and members are connecting and scheduling that first appointment?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got a video coming up here that will talk about some of the process. And it kind of hints at things going on behind the scenes, but I'll clue you into some of that. There are some threads that we'll present throughout here that I think are really important. One is our close working relationship with our providers. And they are therapists. So we have therapists working closely with them. So myself, my clinical team lead, and then we have a whole team of provider relations who work with our counselors on things like billing, on things like documentation, accessing our provider database. But we also get as much information as we can on the front end. So we'll get information about provider demographics, provider specialties, provider insurance panels that they work with. We collect all of that so that when we set up a referral, we're getting the people who we're serving to the best fit for them as quickly as possible. So we're not waiting to get that information from the provider when we're looking for a referral. We take that on the front end. And then once a referral is placed, providers who are used to working with us know that traditionally we ask them to follow up within 1 business day. As providers get busier, we understand that's difficult to do. So we've allowed them to stretch that somewhat, but we still ask them to follow up in a timely manner. And we track that. Every time a referral is placed, we have a team of folks who look at that referral and they're in touch with the provider and the client, I should say, and or the client on a daily basis until that provider has let us know that they're scheduled. So we're watching to make sure that the provider is in contact, and if they're not following up in a timely manner, we'll continue that conversation with them on their availability, et cetera, but often we'll re-refer to another provider who's a good fit, who will respond quickly.
That's great. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Looks like something came in the chat.
Yeah, let me gotta pop that out. For some reason, I'm not able to see the chat. Sorry. Oh, there we go.
Oh, I was just
yeah.
making a comment about how I appreciate the positive framing from the
Yeah.
previous slide. I do have a quick question though, and I didn't catch your title, Dave. Are you doctor or how would you
No.
like me to address you?
Just Dave is fine.
Okay. You mentioned that you're in constant contact with the provider or the client to make sure that there is follow through and there's an appointment. And do you have what do you do if you have a provider who doesn't seem to be kind of following through in the right time frame, or may not be as diligent about keeping in touch with you and or the client? Does that person fall off of your list of providers, or how is that addressed?
Temporarily, yes. At first, temporarily. So we will pull them from an active provider list until we can get in touch with them and sort out what's going on. And I could give you some specifics, but the pattern right now is counselors want to help and they have a tendency to overload themselves. And so we'll see people who will kind of come back online with us and take a number of referrals. And then we notice that the more they take, we'll get feedback that, hey, they're not quite as responsive as we would like. And so when we reach out, we help them get sorted out on how many can you actually take, right? And we appreciate people wanting to help, but it's no help to our members if they're not getting contacted. So from that point, we will put referrals on pause for that provider until they have a chance to catch up. And then once they're available, we will kind of allow that trickle to come back in.
Great, thank you.
And this is Stephen Neldner from Mercer. Question about some of that back of the house activity, and it's really not back of the house, I guess, it's the interaction with the patient. Question relates to what kind of efforts are made during those early days to achieve patient-provider concordance. So on those issues of gender identity, ethnicity, culture, those kinds of things.
Yeah, and that also came up in the chat. That's done at point of contact. So whether the member calls, emails, fills out a web form, or we, at the beginning of next year, we're aiming to have a member hub that clients can self-schedule through. So whatever process they contact us, we collect some basic information, and then we ask them some questions about those preferences. Many people will start off saying that they have no preferences. And once we put out some examples of what preferences we track, they might remember a few. For the majority of clients, I would say the priorities tend to be clinical specialty and insurance availability. But that is why with our providers, we want to know we'll track specialties around working with racial trauma, for example, or issues around coming out, LGBTQIA kinds of issues. as clinical topics, but then we also want to know provider demographics because we'll get requests for both, right? Some clients will say, I don't care what kind of therapist I work with, but here's the clinical topic. Others will say the clinical topic is easy, but I want to work with a provider who feels like somebody I know, who can relate to me. So we have all those provider demographics. We engage the client in a conversation about what's needed, and then we do our best fit. We have a good number of providers fitting most demographics. The tricky one is different languages spoken, especially in Oregon, especially outside of the Portland area. Language, racial ethnic identities can be a little bit more hit or miss. And then it all comes down to provider availability. So we'll have discussions with clients about how long they're willing to wait, what's reasonable, if they're looking at a provider situation where it kind of narrows down to a few providers who may have a lot of demand. So that's when we'll review our options.
Mm-hmm. And Dave maybe mentioned, about how telehealth has actually helped with that when
Yeah,
there are only a few choices.
that's a really good point. Yeah, I neglected to mention that we also do filter by location, but that's opened up quite a bit since if people are willing to do virtual telehealth, it can go all over the state of Oregon. So we have some folks who semi-retired out to Eastern Oregon or to the coast, and they'll see clients from all over. So that does help quite a bit.
Great, thank you. Look, why not go ahead and show a video, and then we can take some more questions. And
I want to real quick
there's a hand
answer
raised.
Emily's
Yeah,
question.
Yes.
Let's see. I think I spoke to most of this. Culturally based, yes, spirituality is part of the part of what we track with providers. And sexual assault, yes, sexual assault is a clinical specialty. We do have that separated out from other trauma as well. So there are a lot of ways that people can drill down. EAP is a little bit more, traditionally it's more of a generalist model where the focus is going to be on assessing what's going on, coming up with a treatment plan for longer term care, and then providing some short-term solutions in the meantime. But what we have found over the years is if we get started with somebody who we can expect them to continue with, who is very knowledgeable in assessing and treating those things from the front end, then that minimizes client disruption. In other words, we don't make them start with somebody, use 3 to 5 sessions, and then find out, oh, this person has no experience working in that clinical area. So that's why we try to get that done on the front end.
Mm-hmm.
And Emily, did you
also
have
substance abuse.
Emily, was your question answered? I saw you raised your hand again and then maybe lowered it.
Yeah, no, yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. That was helpful. Yeah, I'm just, also thinking about like the boarding schools, the Indian the boarding school, oh my gosh, Biden's Secretary of Interior, Deb Haaland, and how she's exposing all the past from the boarding school trauma with the Native children, and how that's re-triggering a lot of things for Native families. For example, my family is actually both Taiwanese and Nez Perce and Umatilla. And so, our grandpa, who's 80, like he grew up in that era. He's still alive. And so, it's having a lot of re-traumatizing effects on the community at large. So I was just curious if you all were able to respond to that as well. So
Yeah, absolutely. So what we would do, Emily, if you called in or started the conversation with us around, what can we do about this for me, for my family, et cetera, we're going to get that information from you. What you just talked about, what we're seeing clinically, and that's the advantage of having mental health professionals on the phones right now, is we can get a sense right then and there of what are we going to need going forward, right? What's your openness? And again, some people are very open. They just want to talk to a professional. And others might find in the conversation, I would really prefer to speak with somebody with as similar of a background as we can get. So we will search for what's available in our system, but we really pride ourselves on having a high touch. So if we're not able to get, for example, we don't track tribal affiliation, we don't track at that level with our providers. So that becomes an important piece. We reach out to the providers who are the closest fit, gather a little bit more information, and we hold that kind of we call it warming up the referral. So we'll engage with the providers on your behalf to find a good fit and stay in touch with you about your options and review that with you until you're satisfied with the provider that you start with.
Okay. And then just along those lines, for the surge in anti-Asian bias and hate that's happening now, so similarly, you would be able to assist with
Mhm.
that type of situation as well.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yes. And I'll be honest that our provider situation in Oregon it's not unique, but it is a challenge, right? Our provider demographics, when you look at race, ethnicity, sexuality, we are doing better, but our provider demographics do not match our state demographics, right? So the majority of folks in Oregon who have gone through graduate school and become credentialed or licensed to do therapy, it is not just majority white, but more so than the state population. So that creates a lot of competition for providers who do offer diversity. So that's why we prioritize our relationship building with providers so that we can, and we have focused on increasing the diversity and representation in our panel. So we talk with clients too about there are situations where it's going to be best fit, right? Because of that competition, providers who offer diversity, a diverse perspective, do get busier, do get a little bit more in demand. So we try to walk that line between not asking too much of those providers, not demanding too much of those providers. We know that they're busy, they want to help. So we make it as easy as possible for them to work with us and see the clients that need to be seen, that they want to see.
Okay, thank you. There might be some
Yeah.
future opportunities with efforts to build up the diversity of the behavioral health workforce
Yeah.
in Oregon
Mhm.
to work together. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you, Emily. And
And
then I saw
Dave,
that Katie
yeah,
had a question here. These filters are being made available on the web platform. So the web matching is coming. That's in process now. So it's not live, but yes, all of this will be available so that clients can see their options, can put in their specialties, see their options, select, and then schedule directly within a web-based hub. Currently, they can call in, they can email in, they can submit a request through the web and start the process that way. And so, yes, all of these filters are available with every communication means that members have access to now.
great. Thank you, Dave. Why don't I go
And
ahead and show you?
Umberto,
Yes,
I
go
hate
ahead.
to be all over the time, but since we have other presenters, do you feel 6 minutes is 6 or 7 minutes is adequate?
Yes, we could do it.
Yeah.
Okay. And I
Okay.
I hate cutting off people short. And if we didn't have a full agenda with
Yeah.
other presenters, I'd eat into other time.
Exactly. So I'm going to show a short video and then another slide and we'll wrap up.
The demand for mental health support has increased significantly over the last few years, and Canopy has created a system to continue to.
You didn't see that, right? You didn't see anything playing.
No, I don't think we saw the animation or the video. Just a blank
Okay.
slide.
We're going to skip it. Okay. Sorry about that. I
It's
don't know what
mostly
happened.
what we've already talked through.
Yeah.
So
It just in 70 seconds succinctly talked about the counseling referral process. So I can follow up with a link to that.
Yeah, we can send it out to the invitees after the meeting.
Yeah, exactly.
Perfect.
I'm not sure what happened with that. So the counselor member match, I think we've talked about that already, right, Dave?
Mhm.
And then the partnership with the providers. You've anything else to add around that, around the partnership and how we, have those relationships with the providers?
I'm happy to answer further questions. I think we've covered it pretty well
Yeah.
so far.
Yeah. And then let's talk about this, the last slide. The coordination with health plans, if there's a need for higher level of care, different care, and match with a provider in the health plan, which you've already touched on, but if you can just
Yeah,
bring it home
absolutely.
on that
This
part.
is another thing. I told you there's a theme of trying to do as much on the front end as possible. And so for the most part, this is done on the front end as well. When clients call up, we match them in that moment with a provider who is in our network and on their insurance. Again, wanting to avoid any disruption because it really is a pain, and I totally get that. If you're seeing somebody for 5 sessions and ideally you talk through this in the first session, but it doesn't always happen that way. Unfortunately, we know people who have experienced it. Maybe you've experienced it yourself. You go to talk to somebody for a few sessions and then you find out, oh, I'm not on your insurance, right? So all this good work that we've done, now we've got to get started with somebody else. That is by far the exception because we do our due diligence to set it up ahead of time so that it's seamless. Ideally, you're working with a provider for 3 or 5 sessions. Once the EAP sessions run out, you can continue on with that provider under insurance. Of course, that will depend. Is there a billable diagnosis in place so that we can facilitate that? And we always encourage members to do their due diligence as well, because we don't get daily updates from providers about their network status, nor do they always know, quite frankly, with the complexity of provider networks as they often are. So we encourage the member just to double check. They can do a quick search on their insurance carrier website. Again, providers don't always know, but they can help with this process as well. The other way that this comes into play is if they need a higher level of care. Sometimes we know that in the initial phone call, if there are things that are going to be outside of the scope of EAP, need longer term care, et cetera. So we can help find those resources. We will start that process, getting the member rather, getting their insurance information and starting to look up providers, some of whom we may know or have experience with. And then we can direct them to other ways to get care. Emily, you asked a question a little bit earlier about substance abuse. That is something that we can assess for in the EAP model, but the treatment is outside of our scope. So this is a great example of a time that we'll do this. When we assess that somebody is going to need substance abuse treatment, say a simple outpatient treatment option, we know a lot of the players in the area, and we have partnerships. We don't have direct referral partnerships, but we work pretty closely with them. So we can direct them to folks who would be in their network. We can verify that on some external databases, give them that information so that they can make contact and go from there. So that gives you an idea of what it looks like. I know there are a lot of questions around here potentially, so I'm happy to address a few of those too.
Right. And we'll stay on the line. We'll go off camera eventually here and mute, but we'll be available. Are there any questions right now before we wrap up ours? No?
So this is Brian. I think for one final thought from kind of my perspective, maybe for future discussions, because I don't know if we've ever asked this specifically, but based on other employer groups and employers you work with, what are some of the top practices you've seen that helps reduce, this stigma and helps create kind of an environment where employees are more likely to pursue these services? And also, what are some maybe bad practices? And as you know, the state as an employer, it's hard to consider the state as one employer, right? Because most agencies have their own HR folks. So the other battle we're trying to figure out is how do we do this as this large employer with all these kind of mini employers underneath? So just as a takeaway, if there's any lessons we can learn from other groups, that'd be great.
Yeah, my quick answer to that would be leadership and workplace culture are key. How we talk about not just EAP, because it's not just about us, obviously, but how we talk about taking care of oneself, how we talk about mental behavioral health support. As leaders, that modeling is critical. So ways that leaders can integrate this, even from the casual, periodic reminder of EAP benefits to talking about personal use. Obviously, it's not a requirement. Some people are not comfortable with that. But as people are, even a simple, hey, I called the EAP for a legal situation and I had a really good experience, that goes a long way toward normalizing it. And then the cultural work, the workplace culture piece, can be a lot more difficult, right? But ways that people can do that as leaders and as colleagues, interrupting microaggressions, talking about some of that language. Obviously, it's easier in some places than others, but when people talk about mental illness or they use terms that are more derogatory or harsh, a simple tweak of that. Hey, I think you meant maybe instead of a schizophrenic, maybe you meant people who struggle with schizophrenia, right? Little things like that demonstrate to others that we take seriously that people have this access and feel comfortable. So those would always be my starting points. And I'm trying to avoid getting on a soapbox because then I could go for days and we don't have that kind of time.
No. Thank you, Dave.
Yeah, thank you. And again, this is something I think we can take offline for maybe future meetings. And I know it's something like Teresa and her committee's been wrestling with for a while. So thank you both. Great information. We will now turn it over to Kaiser. I saw Sapari and Dr. Bachman. And again, I scheduled a 10-minute break, knowing we may need a couple minutes. So again, I think we can go a full 30 minutes to 22 after the hour. And I will turn it over to you guys.
Perfect. Thank you, Brian. And thank you to the committee for inviting us back. And I know that Brian has already provided an overview of the topic we are presenting today, so I'll just do a quick introduction of our team members here. So with us, we have Michelle Teeples. She is our Senior Director of our Mental Health, Behavioral Health, and Addiction Medicine. So she has a full plate. In addition to Michelle, we have Dr. Keith Bachman, who is in internal medicine by nature. He is also a practicing physician, so he actually had patients that he saw this morning and is joining us this afternoon. He represents OEB and PET as our medical director. So with that, I'll hand it over to Dr. Bachman to kick us off. Sounds like you're on mute.
On mute.
Dr. B.
Sorry about that.
Oh, there you
Okay.
go.
Hey, so we're happy to be here today. Thanks for having us. Not to start glum or expressing my worries and anxiety, but I think coming through COVID, I mean, COVID's awful and it's a huge stress on the healthcare system and it's a lot of questions for individuals on how to live their lives. But I think the impact of COVID is going to be felt in mental and behavioral health and education issues for kids going forward in a way that we are just beginning to grapple with. I know the theme of today's talk was about destigmatization, and maybe there's a lining there. The overwhelming needs for mental health care and people understanding they need mental health care in a way has swamped the conversation around stigmatization. It's still there and we still are working towards that, but a lot of the sort of needs for many people of saying, hey, mental health is important. I am not doing well. I need help. Reaching out to EAP, reaching out to their healthcare providers for that help is more common than ever. So in that is to be reflected in the work today. We do not have this. I think we are where we need to be. I think we have a model that is second to none in our service area. And I think also that there is room to improve. So it doesn't, we can hire more staff, we can see patients, we can see more patients, we can use more effective therapies, yet that, I don't think there's a guarantee that's going to get us out of this in the near term. But not to say, that doesn't mean we shouldn't keep redesigning, keep expanding access and being innovative and creative. Are we going to show the slides or not with this? Am I not seeing them?
Brian, do you want me to drive or?
So
I will drive.
This slide, this first slide here is kind of our panorama or a rainbow of behavioral health care on the top. And on the bottom is really how people access the service. And I almost think that's a more important. We know we have a lot of different programs from low intensity and self-service to high intensity inpatient and outpatient intensive programs. And we just did a listing, I think it was for PEB or the IWG about a year ago. I think we came to 35 programs, and we realized when we turned that in, there was actually a few that were missing. So we have all these programs, but it's really, how does one access this care when someone needs it? How does one know they need the care? How do we seamlessly deliver that care to them? And that can start with self-care. That can start with somebody who's probably already gone to several different websites. If we're saying, hey, let me check out the Kaiser website, and there it's really very easy, right in the front page. If your problem is emotional wellness, click on there, and that provides some options there. There's some self-care tools. There's links to our wellness apps, which include Calm app, which include My Strength, which is sort of a CBT-based anxiety and depression management program. Calm, which is both for mindfulness and sleep, and then most recently Ginger, which is self-referral, self-care coach, text-based coaching. Primary care is so important, and when you talk about destigmatization, reaching communities of color, reaching people who don't think of mental health care as being part of their health needs, and older individuals are often in that category. Lots of people who haven't had mental health challenges before are in that category. People who present with physical symptoms, people who present with physical symptoms due to substance use, increasing, all that kind of comes through, gets us. We see that in primary care. It's the person who's not getting along with their boss, not getting along with their kids, eating more than they want to eat, using more marijuana than they used to use, not sleeping as well, just that whole cycle. But in primary care, we do that detection. We are doing essentially screening, short depression and substance use screening on everybody who comes to a primary care visit, usually done electronically. If people are on the app, reach out to them that way. It's an algorithm. If it's negative, it kind of passes. If it's not negative on those screens, then we do an in-office evaluation. And then we have working in primary care, our primary care behaviorists. So those are individuals who are master's level trained, mostly therapists by training, but they're not really working in the same context as therapists. They have training in wellness. They have training in addiction medicine. They have training in diagnostic evaluations. They have training in anxiety and depression management. So that's often along with primary care, or even the same day as primary care, that warm handoff. Warm handoff is so important because we know there's a sort of very quick drop off from a need for care to getting the care. And if that care isn't met relatively promptly, people will just stop engaging, or they'll go somewhere else. They actually just won't get treatment. So I just want to really touch on that. We also think for communities of color, the primary care, there's maybe more stigmatization, more concerns about getting mental health care. And primary care seems, at least national data, is that's a great way to do it. Really super enthusiastic about where I work at Interstate in Northeast Portland, developing a Black Center of Excellence there, which will include that behavioral health wraparound with really a more conscience about it. It's not fully rolled out. It hasn't been implemented. It's in design phase with people, so the community helping with that. But I think that's going to be an important route for mental health. Similarly, also Interstate at our Gender Pathways program, which does our transgender care services. Mental health is wrapped in it as well. Again, that's a way of destigmatizing, meeting people where they're at, helping people formulate what they may not for themselves formulate as a mental health problem, but get them the care that they need. The other great things, I can't say enough about our BHCs, who work with us, and we go back and forth. They refer back to us when someone needs medication. They refer higher levels of care if needed, but they're also really always, they never forget to talk about the non-medical treatment or the lifestyle treatment for mental health, the healthy eating, the substance use mitigation, the sleep management, the reaching out for support to friends, family, and faith, that I often get focused on medications, or I'm focused on several problems in primary care, and I will sometimes forget to do that. So I want to say, I don't want to minimize, that is not the only route in. I mean, you can access mental health care you can access mental health care in different ways, but just from my primary care perspective, knowing that most people with health issues have primary care, or it's a front door for even people that don't usually access primary care. And so then there's specialty care, which could be therapy, which could be group therapy, which could be intensive outpatient programs, which could be psychiatric care, which might include procedural psychiatry, and from there, all the way to emergency care. We do have emergency room therapists, emergency and psychiatrists available 24/7, either in our emergency rooms or by video in our emergency rooms. We also, when people are calling on the phone and our therapists aren't available for emergency triage, we work with Lines for Life, who's available to do emergency triage and then integrate that back in the medical system. As you know, with Kaiser Permanente, it is all one big system. Our behavioral health care is highly integrated into our overall system of care, integrated with our pharmacy, laboratory systems, dental, et cetera, all really one thing. And we think that's the right way to go about it, and the right way to destigmatize and get the access to care and make it easier and easier to access care. Michelle's going to give a lot more detail about the actual specifics of accessing mental health care. On to the next slide. So health equity, concern for diversity, concern for inclusion is really sort of all throughout the Kaiser system, and it's embedded into everything that we do, into our staff training. I know in the mental health department that is certainly of primary concern, and they really have their own special training and toolkits and take it very seriously. Clinician diversity, same as we already heard, that's a little bit of concern. We'll show you those slides on a specific clinician diversity. We know it's important. We are striving to meet that. Same with culturally competent care, particularly in mental health. And then we're always improving our data and reporting systems, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. We do have
Dr.
yeah,
Bachman,
question.
Under the culturally competent care, so does that your mental health professionals then have a certain, specified, training or competencies they have to, display or?
Let me let Michelle come off mute and take that.
So for cultural competency, many of our providers are trained in different areas of specialty. We don't have a one size fits all. We don't have a one required training that we put them through as far as you must do this and everyone must take this. Many of them come to us with different specific types of training. Does that answer your question?
It does. So has that grown kind of just organically based on the request from your mental health professionals?
It is honestly the most recent one that we did. Probably less about cultural, but more about a specific group was like first responders. So really bringing in some training and development based on some feedback from our providers that we were missing the mark in how we were, addressing first responders or how we were treating first responders within the system. And so we brought in, Dr. Stephanie Kahn to help with some training and bring folks up to speed with their competency and how we interact, our word choices, how they see us, how we see them. And so it is a largely driven on the clinicians, but can be based on our observation for like patient recommendation for a concordant provider that we maybe don't have within the system. So that might push us to look for some type of a training or broader sweep in the network.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, this doesn't relate to mental health, but it was just my lunchtime activity was a grand rounds that we had in primary care. That was actually a case presentation of a Black woman with a pretty bad angry rash on her face. Took her several visits to come in, concerned about infection, concerned about autoimmune conditions, concerned about allergy. And ultimately, she visited a relative who was a cosmetologist who taught cosmetology in California, who said, you know what, it's your hair, you're reacting to the product in the hair weave. And it was a matter of, we knew the doctors who saw her recognized that it was allergic, but without being of the culture and knowing what's involved in placing hair weaves and what kind of chemicals and what can be seen. And I know a Black woman physician or any Black physician would have probably known right away what that was, saving a few visits. but this patient asked to have training done, so that relatively ultimately fine ending, but took a little longer than she would have liked to do, could be a benefit for everybody. We had about 50 physicians on the call, and I was just like so touched. That is how you get better as a group of physicians. I mean, even better, we have had dark skin dermatologists in our practice. There wasn't one there at this meeting, but even better if it was all the physicians, every physician sensitized to it, and even better having those in the clinic where people are being seen. So I just thought that was a nice story, and I was like, this is how to do it. We should be doing this all the time. So
and thank you for sharing. I think it's actually really, I think, valuable to hear how this sort of stuff develops and how, what happens behind the scenes.
Yeah. I think we go on to the next slide. So we're on a path in terms of recognizing how important social determinants are really in all the care that we do, and behavioral health, absolutely, if it's not, and they're so intertwined. So that starts with assessment. We are doing really mass social screening, a little bit mildly through email as people are being scheduled for visits. So that way we can follow up at the visit if there's social needs being detected. Social needs can relate to transportation. Social needs can relate to finances. Social needs can relate to food adequacy. Social needs can relate to housing. All that stuff just has such ramifications on behavioral health, from the stress of not having a safe place to live, the stress of not having enough food, and the stress of not being able. So it's all part of it. So we have this sort of wraparound system related to assessing for social needs. We're increasing the percent of the population. It's come up at the PEB meetings recently on sort of what are the incentives and how does that play out. Well, screening for social needs right now is a system incentive that is out there to make sure that so everybody does the work to get there, so that social needs are being assessed. When we do find social needs, we do have both navigators and community resource staff who are really sort of the community, usually where they're stationed, to help sort of bridge that gap. We also do take stress, trauma-informed care, trauma-related stress, adverse child experiences seriously. Much of the original research on that was done by the CDC in partnership with Kaiser Permanente, and that's really been ingrained in it. It's not fully, it's very personal, and it's looking for it with unexplained symptoms, with mental health problems, knowing not everybody that's part of their problem, but when people do formulate as part of the problem and need the help with it, we're there to help as well. And these are 3 specific programs related to both stigmatization and Find Your Word started in 2016. That was our anti-stigma program. And that was really, obviously pre-COVID, and that was really when we were feeling there was all this unmet behavioral health needs because people weren't coming forward with it. Still a problem. We're seeing the requests for mental health go up. The number of visits per 1,000 among PEB members going up. It's probably was like 25% up over the last 2 years.
Yeah, I believe so.
It was a little higher than our book of business, which also went up. So we have that number. I just forgot to review it before this meeting. So we're seeing more behavioral health care happening, both in therapy settings, more acute settings, and as well as our BHC program. We can track the numbers for our primary care behavioral health program, and it is measurable, accountable, and important. I think you've heard about Thriving Schools. We've certainly presented to OEB on that, just knowing that that's a place where we can do some good by helping educators, supporting employees who are stressed and traumatized themselves, and also helping to teach resilience to kids. And then the newest thing is this Cloud9, which is really a offshoot of Find Your Words, but looking at the gaming community, recognizing that a lot of young people are spending a lot of time doing that. So how can we start to have conversations about destigmatizing and the importance of mental health, to life among young people. So I think I've gone on too long, and I apologize for that, Michelle. I got a little excited here, but I will let you go and take your more concrete data.
Oh, Dr. Bachman, you're okay. So I'm looking at, can I get a time check? Where are we at? Probably 12 minutes?
Yep, I have 13.
Okay, look at that. All right, so just to kind of kick off, I'm so glad Dave was on the call today. Dave and I actually work very closely. We have meetings, we work with Canopy, we know each other, so it was nice to see his face. I do want to tag on to what he was saying at the very end around normalizing and what we can learn from other organizations and each other is really, I'm going to step on his soapbox with him, is to normalize this is to talk about it regularly. Right. And so it isn't when we're in crisis, when there's wildfires, when there's snowstorms, when there's, things going on that drive us to EAP services or employee assistance programs and mental health therapy or substance use programs. It's normalizing the discussion regularly. So ultimately, what I've advised when people have asked me this question is that you create space for it every single month. So if you have a newsletter or you have something that you send out, there's always a corner about your self-care and how to access resources. So it just needs to be normalized from that capacity. And then, of course, I know Sapari and Dr. Bachman could probably talk about, at another time about, just tools that we've used with other organizations around workforce training and engagement and teaching people how to acknowledge and see when your peers are changing and shifting and looking different and feeling different, and how to engage them in a discussion that would lead to helping them find the resources. So I'll just step off that soapbox because like Dave, I could probably stay on it for a really long time. So here on this slide right here, though, similar to a lot of what Dave talked about in his presentation too, is about how do people access care. So we, prior to the pandemic in the Northwest, were providing about 20% of our psychotherapy, our therapy services already virtually. We were doing it before any other KP region was doing it, and really before virtual therapy was cool with all these pop-ups that we've had since the pandemic has happened. Today, we probably provide, all of our options are at a 50-50, so 50% of our templates that we scheduled members into can be scheduled as a face-to-face, or they can be scheduled as virtual or phone. What that means, though, and translates into a data perspective, is that most of our members are actually choosing phone or virtual. So we're seeing that we're trending right around 80% of our care being delivered in a virtual capacity, and that is patient preference. So when they're calling in and scheduling, that's what they're choosing, or they're asking to have the appointment converted. What I would say is when members are calling in, it takes about, our mental health access center takes about 24 seconds to answer the phone. We do screen our members. So we are looking for, similar to the medical model, you're looking for the heart attack, you're looking for the shortness of breath, you're looking for the immediate symptoms that are going to drive you to make a decision, because these are non-clinical people that are screening you to begin with. So if you screen out as emergent, you will be immediately transferred to our crisis team. So that is staffed 24/7, 365, which is wonderful. We have our own crisis team at KP, but we do encourage people, if they need to or want to, reach out to the 988 as well. If you screen as urgent, now urgent, we do have an algorithm of questions that drives for an urgent outcome, but also it can be member implied. So your sense of urgency feeds the urgency that is in the discussion while you're on the phone. So my data today, year to date, 99% of the time, a patient who presents as urgent is seen within 24 hours. And so that's a really great outcome. Our goal is actually 90%, because some members just really aren't interested in being seen right away or within that one day. Sometimes patient preference drives for a day or two later. If you screen as routine, you are coming out 94% of the time. My data says I'm seeing you within 3 days with a licensed therapist who's having a discussion with you about, what's next, what's happening. If you are looking for return access inside of KP, we're about 10.5 days. So how we measure it, I have a lot of different ways I can measure it. Data is beautiful. But to easily translate this to you, once you're in care with your therapist, on average across my region, if you're looking for 3 of the most available appointments with that therapist, the furthest one out is going to be 10.5 days out. So that actually is right within the window of NCQA standards around how we measure time to service and how we get our patients in. I think I've hit everything on here that I want to talk about from a convenience perspective. So if we can just bop to the next slide, I'll just keep us going. Dr. Bachman talked very briefly about our digital therapeutics. I just want to reiterate, digital therapeutics, Kaiser Permanente does not live and breathe under the motto that it replaces our psychotherapy services or our behavioral health consultants. So these are adjunctive to other services. They might satisfy a member and they might treat what they feel is what they need in that moment, but we never want our members to think that that digital therapeutic is a replacement for or a substitute for if you need a different level of care. So he did mention Calm and My Strengths. Everything else you see on here outside of Calm, Ginger, and My Strengths is something that's available, but often it's available through what we call a prescription. So if you're working with a therapist or a primary care doctor who knows how to prescribe these, they can provide you with a subscription, if you will, at request, or if they observe that you would benefit from this digital therapeutic. The Ginger stuff, so Dr. Bachman was talking about this. I pulled some data right before this meeting. It takes about 2 days. So Ginger is a 24/7 wellness coach. So this is not a licensed therapist. This is a coach. We do have systems in place with Ginger, very strategically mapped. So if you're using the wellness coach and the coach reaches a point where it's this person needs therapy, this person needs psychiatry, maybe some med management, they have processes to loop back to us at KP and help to manage that component. It takes about 2 days to get connected once you've activated your account with Ginger. And on average, we're seeing most members have about 4 interactions, 62 messages back and forth. And at the end of their 90-day free subscription with this wellness person, they are rating their coach 4.6 out of 5. So we're really seeing some really great initial results. And it kind of made me chuckle because actually our 25-year-olds to 64-year-olds, and honestly on the more like the 50 to 64-year-olds, are outpacing our younger generation and actually using this digital tool. So really kind of just reaching and stretching where everyone's at. And then lastly, around just some data that I can pull around Ginger, we've been very hyper-focused on it, is that members who are eligible for us to survey today, like how are you improving using Ginger, your anxiety and your depression? And we're seeing about, in both categories, anxiety and depression, about a 45% patient self-reported improvement in anxiety and depression. So again, adjunctive to other options that we have within Kaiser, but just wanted to make sure that you knew our digital therapeutics are out there enrolling. So we'll go ahead and go to the next slide. I think this slide for me really hits to what are we doing to improve the front door. So I will tell you, I've had this department since the end of 2019. So I came here right before the pandemic happened, and then I packaged all my therapists up and I sent them home. So, and now as we're bringing them all back, we're really focused on how can we have a person-centered approach, normalizing how people access care. Like, you don't want to tell your story twice. So therefore we remove that. So coming after November 1st, we've been very, very busy working on this. Historically, if you called, you were screened and then you were put with somebody that you told your story to, and then not somebody, a therapist. And then that therapist helped to get you onto the next, person, which would be your ongoing therapy. It was really more of a paperwork back end thing. We've always been a self-referring department. We will remain a self-referring department in mental health psychotherapy. But we've eliminated the back end issues with the processing of the paperwork. So we no longer need you to talk to that first person to get to the second person. So that will really help to destigmatize, normalize, make people feel like they're not doing more than they are capable of in that moment. We are expanding how we can appoint. So today you can only appoint if you call. That is a big problem for our members. So we are moving to online appointing as well. This slide says November 1st. I'm telling you, if digital tools had a mind of their own, I feel like they do. We've run into just a couple programming snafus on the back end. So we'll be having the online scheduling up just after the 1st. But I don't want to launch something that would fail without us stress testing the environment before we push it to production. So we'll be just after the 1st when we launch our online scheduling. The other big thing here too is that from the perspective of we need to provide access. We have 186 full-time employees that are providing mental health psychotherapy and therapeutics, whether it be group or intensive outpatient programming or individual therapy for adults or adolescents. We know that sometimes the access to those therapists isn't what it needs to be because, like Dave mentioned, they get high acuity panels and they're managing a lot of patients at one time. And so we need to create the space where we can't add any more to their plate. we need to start leveraging then our contracted network that we have. Or other therapists. So with all of this change, a member will be offered an appointment internal. And our hope is always to get it within that 10 business days or 14 calendar days, or offer the next soonest. And if that doesn't meet the member's needs, we will be helping them connect with an external contracted KP provider. And so that's going to be one of the biggest changes that members will feel at the front door when we're going through these processes. What's not changing, and then I'll move to the next slide and then we'll open up for some questions, is none of our phone numbers are changing. The way we manage medication management. So some people think when they call in, I need psychiatry, and they think that's for therapy. So psychiatry team is predominantly and is actually only medication management. And so nothing is changing with how we access psychiatry today. So typically most patients will start with their primary care provider. That primary care provider does have access to a psychiatrist for consults. If it becomes outside of their wheelhouse, or they feel like they need that next level of support, that primary care provider will elevate that member up to psychiatry. So nothing's changing about that pathway. And then any member's request to use an out-of-network provider will follow all usual and customary processes that are outlined in the evidence of coverage. So any request has to go through the normal process in that way. All right, I'm going to take you to the next slide. And this is just a real quick way to see. So the two boxes on your left where it says coming soon, this is a digital screening tool where you can lay in your bed at midnight and answer a bunch of questions, and then a provider will come back and they'll screen it and they'll say, connect with a behavioral health consultant. Let's try this medication, connect with mental health therapy. So it'll be a new screening tool that we have. We're going to launch in December. And then the second box is really adding that online appointing element and then expanding our appointing logic to be really about a more inclusive with our contracted network. Everything to the right is just a reminder that we have our crisis team, we have our behavioral health integration into primary care, and then of course, as always, we have our coveted emergency psychiatric services that are embedded within our ED. And then we'll pop down to this one. This provider diversity screen here is reflective of our MDs and our DOs and our NPs. This is not my therapy. And in fact, when I tried to drill down on my therapy, the best they could give me prior to the last couple board meetings I've done with PEB and OEB and a few others is that they say that we're about 72% white and everybody else is in what they're calling a minority category, which isn't my favorite word, but I'm working with them to really drill down on what really is the demographic of my workforce from a race and ethnicity perspective. I can tell you, we are hyper focused. I have somebody working through Scout who targets diversity hiring. I am really trying to evolve and bring in more people that look like you and look like your family, so that we can continue to really level up our game here at Kaiser Permanente. And then I think this next slide, yep, I just wanted to say I too have a patient advisory council. My council consists of all different races and ethnicities. I have age ranging from 15 to plus 60. I have retired doctors. I have college students. I have retired business women and men. And these are the three things they're focused on. Easy, make it easy. Don't make us work hard. Concordant providers, get something that works so we can filter. We're working on that. And then take a person-centered approach, not just from your spoken language, but really look at your written language and your patient experience when somebody is in crisis and coming into your ED. What's that environment? How does it feel? How do we move through those systems? And then the last slide here, and I'm rushing, I apologize, is really just a collective link to all of our different things. I have mental health, behavioral health, and our addiction medicine programs, but there are a lot of other coaches and classes and wellness pieces that live outside of my portfolio that National KP and KP Grande are really focused on from a holistic approach. So I will pause there. I think I hit my timer. I'm right at or right over.
Thank you. You hit it on the mark. Now we are ready for a break, but let me ask, are there any questions, any follow-ups for Kaiser? You gonna raise your hand? I don't see any. We can, oh, there's one from Sharna.
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to double check. I heard two things about the referral network, about the outside contracted folks with KP. if the KP themselves is saying, we don't have someone who fits your profile, we're going to use contracted, they don't have to go through that approval process, do they?
The member or the contracted provider?
The slide that stated, you know, that if you request to use an out of network provider will follow usual and customary processes. So if they're being assigned one that's outside the network, they don't have to go through this usual and customary process, right?
That is correct. So if we are already contracted, so a great example is I'm contracted with LifeStance. So if we feel like LifeStance can meet your needs, we will say, here's the number for LifeStance. They have their own screening process. Go forth and set up your time with LifeStance. Now, if you're coming to me and you're looking for Michelle Teeples and you want to use me, and I'm using myself as an example, I'm not a clinician, but I have a practice that is not contracted with KP, you would have to follow all of the evidence of coverage, usual and customary processes to get to a Michelle Teeples. KP will not refer you to somebody that's not contracted with us.
Thank you. That clarifies.
Right. So we will take a short break. Let's go 5 minutes. We'll reconvene at 2:31. Thanks again so far for Canopy and Kaiser. Great information. And we'll look at picking it back up with, I believe, MODA is next on the agenda, followed by Providence. So with that, we'll step away for 5 minutes. I encourage, stretching, getting loose, and just recharging, and we'll talk in a few. And then for Kaiser, I think Michelle or Sapari are still sharing your screen. So you'll want to, before you pull up anything you don't want people to see, you'll probably want to stop sharing. Yep, gotcha. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
No problem. I got your back, Sapari.
Thank you. I need that.
Until I stab it. Okay. I think we can get ready to re-adjourn. Or to adjourn. Adjourn, anyways. I think we can get ready to get started. So next on the agenda, we have Modin. I see Alina. Will you be controlling the presentation on your end?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. And
All right.
looking at the list, yeah, Veronica. It's not exactly hairdo, it's a lack of haircut, is the way I would frame it. The pandemic, you know. So with that said, we will turn it over to Moda. And again, 30 minutes. So we have you going till about 2 after the hour. If we need a minute or two longer, again, I think we can eat into our discussion time at the end if we need to.
Perfect. Well, I will turn it over to Dan Toma, who will be presenting on Moda Health.
And I should take myself off mute so you can all hear, and should be presenting here in Teams in 1 moment. Present.
It may take a minute. There we
So
go.
it's working out a few details on my screen.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, I can see it on my end.
Excellent. I think we're ready to go. Well, thank you very much for having us here. It's great to be able to talk with members directly and not always just board members and staff. So really appreciate the chance to dialogue with you. And as Brian said earlier, please just jump in with questions or pop something in the chat. Appreciate your desire to approach this as more of a conversation than a lecture. Similar to the other presentations, brought some material to share with you related to the 2 primary questions that you asked around addressing stigma and what is the member experience when seeking behavioral health care. For stigma, I'm going to take my 3 main bullets here and do them all out of order. So I want to kind of piggyback on what Dr. Bachman mentioned about, I think it's really important to recognize that although we still do have a long ways to go in terms of destigmatizing mental health, I think it's very valuable to recognize as well how far we've come. And so that's my middle bullet point. It's happening already. This has been a long arc of normalization. We had our first mental health parity law in the 1990s. We had a really robust parity law in Oregon in 2007 and then nationwide in 2009. And those things have done an incredible amount to reframe the conversation in saying that mental health is of equal importance to physical health. And I think one of the important things that we do at MODA to really support that is a really robust parity compliance program, and really viewing everything that we do through the lens not of whether it just meets the letter of the law of parity, but also the spirit of that. Also, as Dr. Bachman mentioned, the pandemic has really brought mental health and substance use concerns to the forefront in our national conversation, with about 1/3 of the country reporting significant symptoms of depression and anxiety, which is triple what was being previously reported. You see it in the media very frequently. We've got really prominent people and people who would be, considered sort of cultural icons, the sports figures, Naomi Osaka. You've got Serena Williams talking about her mental health struggles. You have Bruce Springsteen coming out talking about his mental health struggles. All of those things really go a great distance, I think, towards helping us as a society understand that mental health really is just another aspect of our overall health. and an extremely important one, and not something that there should be any weird feelings about treating it any differently from how we do treat our physical health. Jumping up to my first bullet, I think one of the things, again, sort of along the similar lines, is to really make it easy to access care. The more that we make that easy and seamless for folks to be able to access care, the more we just make that a super normal experience. In publicizing it, so I want to actually move forward in some slides to some examples of things that I've seen that are, I think, helping to destigmatize mental health. One thing is to really pair it with physical health. And here's an example of how we do that. This is a mailer that went out to PEB members in April of this year. And right next to each other, we've got the Meru Health, the information about that for depression, anxiety, and stress, right next to the programs that you've got for Cirrus MD in order to be able to text a doctor. So keeping those things together, having robust mental health support in primary care offices. So one of the things that MODA does, of course, our model is totally different from Kaiser in that we don't own our physician practices, but we incentivize our primary care practices to have behavioral health specialists within the primary care practice. And so really working to have those two things hand in hand. Getting the word out. So we did a mental health campaign in coordination with our sponsorship with the Portland Trailblazers. We've got a whole page devoted to mental wellness on our Trailblazers webpage. And another piece that we did, we'll see if this works. In conjunction with that, we played snippets of this video at Blazer Games and also put these out on social media. It's also, it's not just getting, not just exposure, but also providing information. So I'll play a quick video if this works. It looks like it's going to. So, and there's actually two other sets of videos. One for that relates to mental health concerns for adults, and one mental health concerns for kids and families. So just getting the word out there. Another thing, this has been mentioned as well, but it's really valuable for people to talk about our own experiences with depression, with anxiety. Again, you've got Bruce Springsteen out there. Here's an example from the MODA and Blazers web page. This was a Moda Health member who went through the MABRU program that we offer, and she was so enthused by the program, she asked to create this video. So I find that pretty inspiring. I want to come back to that first slide on stigma. Let's see if we can jump back there real quick. No. And just really and invite ideas from you, things, additional ideas that you've got that you want to share, or questions you have about any of this stuff, or ideas to bounce off of us before we go forward and talk about the experience of seeking care.
Yeah, and maybe this is for the next part of the discussion, but again, Moda and Kaiser have different business models, right? And so, that can translate into different ways of providing services or coordinating. So you've provided a couple tools and programs Moda provides. How do you ensure that the member is still getting I don't know how to say it, just a unified experience, or they don't feel like they're just being sent to provider A and then provider B and provider C. Does that make sense? And let me know if that's really going to come up in your next part of the presentation.
That will. I'll talk about that in a couple of different ways in the next part of the presentation. So we'll just keep that out there as a teaser for the moment.
Okay, committee, any other questions from other audience members? Okay.
Okay, so let's focus now on the experience of accessing care. Yes, we've got Emily.
Sorry, I'm having trouble with my buttons. I was just curious as to the heavy stigma around mental health for culturally based groups like Asian and Latino. And like, is there anything that you've tried to do to target or be more responsive to those specific culturally based stigmas?
That is a really great point, and something that really we need to take back. We do prioritize trying to when we identify providers of color, providers from specific racial or ethnic groups, prioritize getting those providers into our panel. As far as specific outreach related to those subgroups, I'm not aware of any off the top of my head that we've done so far, but that's an excellent point. Thank you.
Thank you.
So there are different paths that a member may choose to access behavioral health care. As a PPO model, there is no gatekeeper function to accessing care. Members can access care directly just by making an appointment with a provider. That of course assumes that you have some idea of what provider you want to make an appointment with. So there's various ways that, various options for that. First one is our Find Care tool, which is online, available to all members. And I see the resolution on this did not come out very clear. But on the Find Care tool, there's an option here that says more search options. So there's some very basic information in the initial search options. But if you choose this more search options, then you're able to search based on language. We have many different languages listed. Not all of them necessarily, we have providers that speak those languages, but we're able to do that search based on that. And on the right here, this is actually more devoted to physical healthcare. And on the left, we have various specialties, ethnicity, race and ethnicity. We have like religious orientation, and different types of care, like if I want dialectical behavioral therapy or cognitive behavior therapy or group therapy, we're able to search based on those parameters, as well as race, ethnicity, gender identity, and gender. Those are all options that we're able to search from. Kayla.
Yeah, thank you. Hey, I was just struck by from the film where she talked about therapy was fear invoking, but yet, you know, we're calling things therapy, and I just kind of wonder if, you know, if you guys have anything in the works for, you know, how you get around that, where, you know, it's our terminology sometimes. So that was it.
Yeah, thanks. So, you know, I think the Meru program is a really good one for that, because it's not therapy in the traditional sense. The clinical outcomes are very equivalent to therapy, if not a little bit better in many cases. But as it's said in the video, it's not, you know, going and talking to a therapist. So it's a very different process. Talking about mental wellness, again, the integration with primary care, really expanding the range of options that a person can access for support for their mental health, I think, is important.
Thank you.
And it may be worthwhile, maybe just for a point of education. I had mentioned earlier about the most recent PEB board meeting and how you guys had added more fields to the Find Care tool, but that ultimately it's still a challenge to get providers to respond with that information. I think it may be worthwhile to spend a minute explaining, based on your business model, it really relies on contracting with providers. And you place all those sorts of requirements in those provider contracts, and they're on a schedule. And so to add additional requirements to those contracts doesn't happen overnight, right? So you're in this kind of weird situation where it takes a while to require these sorts of things on providers. It takes time, negotiations, and in the meantime, you're really trying to push them towards these efforts. So I want the committee and attendees just to understand the challenges, you know, based on the business model, and just have an idea, have a better sense of why it takes time to not only update the tool, but then get the data you need from providers.
Definitely. And one encouraging thing related to that is, I would say we are, well, I wouldn't just say we are far ahead of the game in terms of being able to get those data from our behavioral health providers in comparison with being able to get that kind of data from our medical providers. One reason for that is we've collected this kind of data from our behavioral health providers for a long time. And so they're used to it, whereas the medical providers aren't so used to it. Also, medical providers more often are part of these big bureaucratic systems, and, you know, somebody somewhere, some lawyer in the system says, no, I don't want you sharing that information, and then you've got a total block on that. But it's true as well that there's a lot of data that's not in here yet, and that will take time to more fully populate this database. Another thing that has helped us with behavioral health providers is that we have done a recontracting project throughout the course of this year with our behavioral health providers, and are asking them to visit this survey as part of that recontracting project. So that's giving us a little bit of a leg up as well. Just because of, you know, the way different data systems do and don't play together, we've got another database that's got a bunch of data in it for our behavioral health providers. We weren't able to get all of that data into this system. And so through our navigators and our behavioral health team, which we'll come to in just a moment, we're able to actually access some information that's not necessarily out there on the web yet.
And is it fair to say that really, I mean, this is a challenge and struggle for much, if not all of the industry?
I think it is, yeah.
Thank you.
But it's the direction we're going in. And so however quickly or, you know, however we have to drag the world along with us, this is what our members need and want. And so we will get there. And I think truly in behavioral health, we'll get there more quickly and more fully than I think medical will take longer.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So again, in terms of helping members find the right providers, in terms of that diversity, we've got that tool out there on Find Care, but it's also possible, you know, you'll search for a particular combination of clinical specialty and racial or ethnic background or language or whatever it is, and you may come up with no results. So there's a number of ways that we assist members with that. One is that we can take on doing a lot of that legwork. So if you contact us and let us know that this is the kind of clinical need that you have, this is the kind of background that you're looking for in a provider, then we can get on the phone and get on the web and consult our systems and do that. Another thing is that it has become quite common for us to make network exceptions, benefit exceptions, and allow the in-network level of benefits for a provider who may not be in network, if that's what it takes in order to get that member seen with a provider with a concordant background. We also use that as an opportunity. That's an identification of a provider that perhaps we didn't know about or perhaps had not been interested in contracting with us previously. So we use that as an opportunity to try to get those providers into our panel so that that they're more widely available to members the next time around. One of the great benefits that PEB has is the MOTA 360 program, which features our health navigators. And this is a specially trained team to really provide high touch assistance to members in whatever it is kind of healthcare needs that they're experiencing or whatever issues, whether it's with their claims or whether it's finding the right kind of a provider, finding the right kind of primary care provider or a behavioral health provider that that is concordant, meets whatever clinical needs you're presenting with. So the health navigators are an excellent resource for that, and you can get them by calling just the regular MOTA customer service number for PEB members. So that's good. I want to talk briefly about something that has the potential to be much better. And this is a program that we are looking forward to discussing with Mercer and the PEB board this year for potential of being able to implement this for the 2024 renewal. And that's a new program called Behavioral Health 360 that we're building out. And so despite all of the good things that I've just said about the resources that are available for accessing care, we know that it's very difficult to access care. When we're doing searches for members, we can end up providing or calling 10 or 20 different providers to find one person that's got the availability to see that person. It's a nationally recognized workforce crisis, as well as a state recognized workforce crisis, which they're pumping hundreds of millions of dollars into, trying to address that. But in the meantime, people still need care. So we're building out this new program, Behavioral Health 360, that features new staff called Behavioral Health Champions. And what they can do is they can walk a member through a quick decision support tool, quick risk screening to make sure, like was mentioned earlier, that we're not missing a heart attack or acute suicidality, and that we're providing appropriate immediate care in those circumstances. But then the champion's job is to connect that member with a provider who we know has availability to see that member. and who has the appropriate background and clinical expertise. So again, we can look in our database right now and find providers that are a great fit for almost whatever you present with. But to be able to get an appointment with that provider can be a very different story. So the champion takes the pain out of trying to find a provider with availability. It's not enough just to get an appointment with a provider. Also has to be somebody that you click with. The sort of chemistry between the provider and the client is super important for the success of behavioral health treatment. So part of the workflow here then is for us to follow up with you after that first appointment and make sure and check in with you. Did that provider seem like they're gonna be a good fit for you? Does it seem like they're gonna be able to help you in the way that you're looking for? And if not, that gives us a chance to go back to the drawing board and figure out what else might be a better fit and get things started in the right direction. Because it's unfortunately very common for people to go and see a provider once and it's like, I'm not sure that's really going to do much for me. And especially if it has been difficult to access services in the first place, then they may drop out at that point. But we don't want that. We want to make sure the person gets in with a provider that seems like a good fit. And then a third piece of that is to be able to follow up after a person has been in services for a while and say, is this treatment working in the way that you want it to work for you? And if not, then we can look at what additional resources can we bring to bear, or is there maybe a change in direction that might help get things moving in the right way. So we're really excited about this program. We're bringing in some additional partners to help us with this. One key partner is Spring Health. They are a national provider with a presence in Oregon as well, that's built up their own panel of providers, doing great in terms of provider diversity, 40%, 7% of providers identifying as BIPOC, 30 or more languages. And they're offering access. They're currently around 1.5 business days. And we've actually got a performance guarantee in our contract with them for access within 3 days, 3 business days. Also, they're really proactive in ensuring that their web content is accessible to people with visual disabilities or other kinds of disabilities. Another provider or partner in the Behavioral Health 360 program is called Gemini, and this is a program with discrete video modeling for children with autism spectrum disorder, developmental disabilities. I see we're really coming up on time here. The third partner is Hazel and Betty Ford Foundation, specializing in substance use disorder treatment. They are already a provider in network with us and have beefed up some additional services as part of this program. So I've ran through a whole bunch of things and would like to open it back up for additional questions or comments to the extent that Brian feels that we've still got time to do so.
We do. We still have some time at the end we can kind of move into. So we're good if there's some questions for Moda. Okay. If you think of any during the Providence presentation and Moda's still on the line, we can come back to it after our when we go to the group kind of roundup and next steps discussion. So thanks again. Thank you to Moda and the team. Great information. We will now turn it over to Cash and Providence. And then Cash, are you able to share and run the presentation on your end?
I am. I'm gonna see if I can figure out how to make technology work here, Brian. So give me just a second. Let me figure out if I'm smart enough to manage the computer.
The new stresses.
The new stresses, the things you don't know you need to worry about.
And as a
And
backup,
also
I
to
can
make-
always pull up the PDF and share it. So no worries.
Let's see. Oh, I got it. Gotta make sure I get to the right slide deck because I got like a million different things happening here.
Okay. We see the slides. There you go. Yeah, it looks like the presentation is up and running.
Sweet. All right, look at there. All right, so bear with me. My slides are here. My camera's here, but I'm gonna be looking in this direction, so that's the only reason why. So thank you so much, PMAC folks. It's so nice to be back to talk to you guys again. Always a pleasure to have these discussions, especially as we're talking about emotional well-being and whole person health and how we can increase access in order to get people the support that they need. So I'm going to flip to the first slide here. So quickly, I'm not alone today. I did bring some talented experts with me from the Providence side of things. So for those of you who may or may not know me, my name is Cash Spencer. I am the Senior Director of ASO Account Services, and I've been the relationship manager between PEV and Providence for almost 13 years since Providence has managed the PEV population. So it's been quite the pleasure. With me, I also have Darcy White, who's our Director of Provider Relations. And she's going to walk through some provider network demographics and credentialing updates that we have to talk about. I also have with me Melissa Top, who's our Executive Director of Care Management. And she's going to talk through the questions that you all had about care navigation and the member experience. And then also with us, I have Dustin Howard, who's our Director of Healthcare Services and Behavioral Health. And he's going to focus in on the destigmatization and how we are addressing that. So I'm going to start off with just an overview of the access components and then also member demographic data. The beauty of going last is this is not anything that you haven't already heard from the Canopy folks and from Kaiser and from MODA before we got started here. So I won't belabor what's on the left side of the slide, but as we've talked about here today, what we do know is that we have an opportunity to improve access, reduce wait times, increase the awareness of the services that are available to members, and then offer personalized support for those members throughout the healthcare ecosystem, improve integration, which is something that we focused on a lot within Providence and how we can bring these resources and integrate them into the healthcare services that we offer. And then ultimately what we want to do is to reduce stigma. So I think we're all in agreement with that's kind of the goal here for today. And since emotional well-being and whole person health has been a priority for Providence, some things that we've done from the standpoint of ensuring that our members have access to the resources is looking across the communities for alternate resources. As others have said on the call, of course, there are shortages in providers, there's challenges with language, things of that nature. And so what we've tried to do is find alternate methods of getting people the support that they need. So basically meeting them where they are and ensuring that when they're ready to get help, that the help is there. So we've done that with some additional community resources. We've, like the others have said, we've implemented and introduced some new digital tools, expanded access to telehealth and additional virtual therapies. We're making sure that people have access to parity care. That means removing barriers. So for example, our members do not need a referral to access behavioral health therapy. You can do that without a referral, even on the Providence Choice Plan. And then also just ensuring that we're continuing to innovate as we bring forth our changing the payment models to ensure that we get more access to providers in our network. So I'm going to walk through just a little bit of demographic data here. Probably one of the most important things, especially kind of getting to the question that you've asked, Brian, about how we're aligning our members with the providers that are in alignment with what's important to them or their specific communities or cultural or demographic needs. The first part about that is to ensure that we're collecting the information on our members. So data being the most important factor. So as I walk through these numbers here, starting off with race, this is information that we've been able to collect directly from our enrollment information on PEB members. Now, once we get later on into the slides, Melissa, or Mel, you might hear me call her Mel, she'll talk a little bit more about other methods that we've used in order to collect data on the members when our care managers and our behavioral health managers are engaging with members. But this is information that we've been able to collect directly from the data that we get from PEB. And as you can see, this shows that right now we have 83% of PEB members that we've received information on have provided race information. That means that not everyone has provided a race indicator in their information. Ethnicity has been a bigger one that we've been able to collect directly from our data. So 85% of PEB members have shared with us their ethnicity information. So this is better, but still not 100% there. And here you can see, even in language, only 18% of members have shared their language information. And of course, 99% of that is English. But what it doesn't get to is where there might be other opportunities. So Spanish being one, but then what about some of those other languages that we know exist within the populations? So what this tells me, before I jump to the next slide and pass it off to Darcy, what this tells me, especially as we're trying to connect people with the providers that matter most to them, what we don't know is some of the SOGI information. That's not captured here. Sexual orientation, gender identity information, veteran status, whether there are any other types of social determinants of health information. That information is not captured here. And so we've had to go to alternate means in order to capture that information in our data. And again, we'll talk about that just a little bit later, but I do want to pass it off to Darcy, especially as we've talked about how member population matters, and then how this matches up with what we're seeing in the provider side. So with that, I'll turn it over to Darcy.
Great, thanks, Cash. So we are at Providence working to collect, as Cash said, member-specific information, because that will better inform what we do on the provider side. In the past, we have recruited specifically around specialty of a provider to the member ratio, when we look to see adequacy there and for time and distance standards from the member's home. I apologize for my voice. The smoke is a little bit too much for me in Portland right now. So it's great when we get specific member information so we can really inform the network. We're trying to get provider data the same way that we're trying to get member information. Right now, we've got about a 42% return rate where providers are answering all or some of our questions. There's questions about completing cultural competency training. I noticed Emily asked earlier, we do use the OHA approved cultural competency training stats, by the way. It's interesting that the provider response rate is pretty even across the different types of providers. So PCPs versus medical specialties versus behavioral health specialties. So this is where we're seeing that data. We asked specifically about competencies for LGBTQ plus communities, but in addition, if the provider themselves identify as a member of that community. And then moving on to the next slide, Cash.
Quick question.
This is what we've, oh, sure.
Sorry, this is Brian.
Hi, Brian.
One, I think we need to all acknowledge that the data issue and collecting data is going to be a long-standing issue that we continue to work on and tackle. And it is one that we have challenges all across the spectrum. It's not only PEB collecting the data, storing the data with our system, but communicating that sort of stuff. It's a very complex area is what I'm saying, and it's not going to be resolved overnight. So that leads to my question, is there any reliable data that you and other carriers have that just speaks to statewide? Do we know, just based on general statewide demographics, where certain shortages are based on maybe gender, race, ethnicity, et cetera?
I am not aware of anything statewide. Cash?
No, I was just going to ask if the question was specifically related to provider network. Is that what you were getting at, Brian?
Well, yeah, so we understand we're not going to be able to get all the data we need right away. In the meantime, is there more statewide demographic data that can inform us on what sort of, provider gaps there are, not only in the Providence network, but I'm thinking more globally. We've heard across the board that there's a shortage of providers in Oregon. And Providence isn't going to solve that by itself. MODA is not going to solve it by itself.
Right.
Do we have a
Right.
sense kind of what the big picture looks like? And, what are some of the provider, types or demographics that we know are lacking in the state?
I think it's a great question. And I know probably last year when we started doing some research on adding all of these filters into our provider directory, that was one of the things that we were looking at was like, is there some sort of source out there that tells us where there are gaps, even in just the types of providers that we have, or I don't know if types is the right word, but you know what I'm saying? Just like which communities or cultural competencies or cultures, there are some gaps that we want to go and focus on.
Yeah.
And at that time, we didn't find a good resource. And so we kind of just started from the grassroots of what Darcy is talking about here of we have this questionnaire and credentialing. We'll start with this and see what we might be able to collect and formulate on our own. Because even being part of a delivery system that has clinicians and things of that nature, they collect that information as an employer, but not necessarily to provide to us as a payer. So there's challenges to your point, Brian. Overall, I think it's probably a good exercise for us to take away and look to see if those resources exist. But at least,
Okay.
a year ago when we looked, it did not.
Yeah, and again, this is posed to all the carriers. And my follow-up question, which wouldn't be for today, I think it's for kind of higher level brainstorming, is there any role PEB and our carriers can play in trying to recruit providers from outside Oregon? Knowing that this is beyond PEB, and it's beyond just, a per carrier. So, but is there still, any outside of the box things we can think of to try to fill in some of the more statewide gaps that would benefit, PEB as a group as well? So, and we can take that offline as well.
Yep, that's a good topic for later. Yeah, Brian, that's a great idea. Pooling our resources. One of the other things that I'm sure the other carriers have experienced as well, and that is in the rural areas, we have a statewide network. We have providers in every county. However, there is a growing number of behavioral health specific providers in some of our more rural communities who choose not to contract with insurance companies. As we've talked about before, behavioral health providers differ from physical health in their practice patterns in that they are generally solo practitioners, one or two people in an office, as opposed to a group clinician like physical health. So these providers are saying, I'm not going to deal with anything that has to do with insurance. I'm simply going to accept self-pay because their patients can then just send those claims to their insurance company and they don't have to be credentialed, be monitored. And it's certainly their choice to do that. But that's a growing issue amongst the smaller behavioral health providers in our more rural counties that I think we will see more of.
And that's really good to know. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Okay, and then on our provider directory, we've looked to try and capture as much information as we hear from our members that they want to see. This is what we're currently doing, and we fill this information in, of course, as we receive it. I would love some feedback from members if they have thoughts about displaying this differently or different categories that might be more helpful. And I'm just noticing that Dustin put a note in the chat about licensing reciprocity in Oregon is more difficult. So in other words, if you move here from Illinois and you're a licensed social worker, your license doesn't necessarily come over with you. You would have to go through other testing, et cetera. So that's what that means. And then finally, I don't want to take up too much time. just to let you know where we are with this data, we are looking, again, to continually improve how we're getting member and provider data. We know it's important. We want to get that. But we have been adding, as I said at the beginning of the call, both ratios, geo access, time and distance, and diversity and ethnicity is just as important as those two things when we make network decisions. So in recruitment, where we spend our energies. We're getting currently getting DEI information through the credentialing process, which means when we bring on a provider, and then we check in every 3 years, but we're also getting it through the Behavioral Health Network team and through other clinical sources like what Mel Top will talk about a little bit. And then from our clinical staff, again, Mel's team, they get a little bit more information than we may have on the member and look to try and get match specifics from the provider network. We look at if a member is seeing a provider out of network, we will approach them about getting a contract, bringing them in network, seeing how we can get that shored up a little bit more. When for our members, it depends. They can bill for these providers that I'm talking about. They choose not to bill, but they will do a claim form, generally speaking, that the member can then submit, and then based on their benefits, we would pay usual and customary. We also, again, as I just said, would attempt to do a contract with them or a single case agreement, meaning for this one member, could you do a contract with us, and kind of a practice run, if you will, to see that we are really trying to be easier to work with, remove a lot of the administrative burdens that have been on behavioral health providers for quite some time. Does that answer that question in the chat? Good.
Yeah, and before we flip over to Mel to talk about the member experience, I did want to just add one more comment to answer Brian's question about other options. So, like the other carriers, we've introduced some virtual means. We've come up with other solutions in order to try to expand access and get access to other providers in different ways. Like our behavioral health concierge, that was introduced in order to get same day and next day access in the middle of the pandemic when our frontline caregivers and workers were challenged with trying to find access at a point when they needed to stay in the workforce, but we're also facing some serious challenges at the time. So that's when we introduced that, and we've since expanded that beyond just our own Providence caregivers, and now that's available to all of our Providence Health Plan members in Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Texas, and Montana. So we've really tried to think outside the box on different ways to expand that, just to address some of the questions you just asked, Brian. So with that, I will switch over to Mel. So Mel is going to talk to us a little bit about our member experience and the journey and how we help people navigate through the system. So Mel?
Yeah, thank you. All right. So it's interesting to listen to, the data that we gather through files, areas where we're trying to capture information. Brian, you'd said, is there anything statewide or maybe even region-wide? I'll tell you all, when you talk to the member directly, you can gather some really good information. So from a care management perspective, just to kind of kick this off, when we reach a member or they call into us, we have a comprehensive assessment that we ask, but also balancing the not overburdensome amount of questions. But it is an area that we have really focused on to identify social determinants, barriers to care, preferences to care, whether that be race, language, geography, specialty, provider specialty that is specific. So that's been, that's a unique area of care management where we are talking directly with members. So gathering that information at the time of the assessment, it's gold. It really is. So to back up and talk about the member navigation journey as we have it today, so we have different levels of service that we provide for our members. Self-guided, Members are, at times, they are able and willing to do self-guided search. So using our provider directory, which Darcy had shown you, they'll call our customer service department. They'll get a well-trained customer service representative who will walk them through how to access the directory. They may even provide them a list of providers that they could call on their own time, and or transfer them if needed to more assistance, which is a customer service navigator. So the customer service navigator will offer an additional level of service, assisted we're calling it, and they will help more specifically with walking the member through the processes, maybe potentially calling providers for access, ensure that they have timely appointments available, showing them how to log in to My Providence or log into different online tools. And if a member just isn't in a space to do any sort of self-navigation or lower level assisted, that's where care management comes in. Our clinical support coordinators and our BH navigators will assist members throughout the process. So I think of it as you can walk them to the head of the trail and show them there's the trail, or you can walk the trail with them. When you get to that care management clinical support, you're walking the trail with them. That way, when you get to the end of the trail, is what you expected to see there? And if not, you're right there on the spot to course correct or to take a different route for another resource. So the care management clinician, or maybe clinical support coordinator, as I mentioned, they will walk the member through Learn to Live, which is a self-help behavioral health tool. They will navigate access issues. So finding that provider that may be out of network, but is the provider available to them. There's access constraints elsewhere. Also providing that one-on-one complex case management support. So, symptom management, escalation, exacerbation of a condition, whether that's behavioral health or medical or coexisting or comorbid. Our clinicians are trained to do that. Though the one tool that we came up with as a proof of concept, which we are going to be scaling, is our behavioral health hub into care management, which is a single source of contact between our customer service department and our CM and UM team. So this allows for our care management navigators as well as clinical support coordinators to provide UM navigation, so utilization management with prior auths, provider searches, network access, as well as that care management function. That has been something that's been super successful in our model with behavioral health. All right, the next slide, please. So as I mentioned, our behavioral health hub was a model that we set up, and that has led to our Pathfinder program, which is coming 1/1/23 for our PEB membership. This is bringing that single model that we use for UM, utilization management and care management, actually back to the customer service side as well. So when a PEB member calls in, starting 1/1/23 to our customer service, they are going to have a True Health Guide who will stay with them through their question until resolution. Now, there may be a transfer from a customer service navigator to a clinical side, but that experience will be one question, one time to explain, one time to ask, and we are going to be ensuring that that member then has their person, their True Health Guide, to circle back with the next day, the next week, the next month, and they will have that point of contact. In our Pathfinder program, we are going to be watching our key performance indicators closely. We're going to be looking at time to scheduling and monitoring how effective we are. If the appointment occurred, so follow up after appointment. Did the appointment go well? Was the member satisfied with the appointment? Did they get their issue resolved? So from the moment they called to the moment the issue was considered resolved, what kind of timelines are we looking at? We're expecting with this model, we will be able to provide a higher enhanced service for our PEB members through this Pathfinder and True Health Guide model. We'll have kind of the hub and spoke where our care management and customer service teams will be the hub, And then we'll have our spokes where we will go with the member. If we have a pharmacy call, we will go with the member to pharmacy. If we have a resource need outside of Providence, we will go with the member to that resource to ensure at the end of the day that all of the loose ends are tied up. Again, now if a member chooses to self-guide, absolutely we will support that. We will say, we're going to check with you in a week to see how that self-guide is going. If it's going great and they were successful, we'll document that. If it didn't go great, they haven't been successful, we'll jump in and we'll help them. So this is what's coming in 1/1/23. We're super excited for this model. We do have proof of concept with our behavioral health hub, so we are excited to scale it and roll it out further. All right, and I think here I turn it over to Dustin.
Yeah, and before we jump into Dustin, I did just want to mention one thing. I know during the Kaiser presentation, and thank you, Mel, that was phenomenal as always. One other thing that I recall hearing during the Kaiser presentation was mention of the First Responders Initiative. And I do want to say that Mel and Dustin's team have also gone through and started a First Responder Initiative. And so right now we're in a pilot phase with another client, but we are also moving in that direction to make sure that we're creating the resources that are dedicated or designated for a specific population, especially those with different sensitivities, such as the First Responder Initiative. So I just wanted to point that out as well. And then before we get into, oh, sorry, go ahead, Mel.
I was just going to say yes. If Cash would have given me the green light to talk about that project, I definitely would have, because that's our most recent. We're super excited to have certified first responder clinical care managers. Yes, that has just recently launched, and we're super excited for that one. So.
Yeah, and we've been, of course, talking about how this gets scaled and potentially spread to the pet population. So certainly more to come on that as we look to what we learn with the rollout of that program. So just wanted to share that. Before we go into I keep screwing that up, destigmatization, were there any questions about the Pathfinder or navigation before we switch over to that component? I didn't see anything in the chat.
Yeah, and I don't see any, Cash.
Okay, all right, Dustin.
All right, thanks, Cash, and I will be brief to get through all of this to try to keep us on schedule here, because I know we're right at 3:30.
You can. We'll give you at least 5 minutes. We can be a little flexible. So I built a little bit of padding into the end.
Okay, thanks. I was going to make a joke and say, what better way to destigmatize behavioral health than to put the behavioral health person into 30 seconds? No, I'm teasing. So stigma reduction obviously is something very close to me as a behavioral health provider. And so I'm excited to talk about this, and it's not an easy problem to solve for. But I think that we've made leaps and bounds just as a society, but there's still quite a ways to go. And I think some of what I'm going to go through will likely be reinforcing what others on the call have brought to attention. But the first thing that I'd like to point out around how we reduce stigma is that language matters. And one thing that I think is critically important to remember as we communicate around mental health and substance use or substance misuse is that not all mental or emotional challenges are mental illnesses. And that sometimes can be where people first go when they hear, oh, I'm feeling depressed or I'm feeling anxious. When that's getting labeled as a mental illness, that can certainly cause people to be more hesitant to seek out help. But when we use language that says life can be extremely difficult, and we are likely to have responses to those difficult circumstances. And it might take the form of anxiety, it might take the form of depression. And some of those are going to be responses that are extremely usual, but can be challenging if they're not addressed. And so I think drawing that differentiation in how we communicate about this is critically important. And the same is true for substance misuse, abuse, chemical dependency. There's so many terms that have gotten thrown out there related to substance use. And I tend to err on the side of using substance misuse for a particular reason. One is because we want to be inclusive of individuals that might, not be hitting that line of abuse or dependence or anything like that, but might be using alcohol in a very unhealthy way. And alcohol misuse is something that gets overlooked very, very often, but it can also be extremely destructive when not addressed. And so how we language that, we're not waiting for people to become dependent or reach a point where they are abusing a substance, but we might also want to intervene if they begin reaching for substances to use in a way that is, unhealthy or just maybe a coping skill that we don't want them to continue with. The third is using compassionate language that does not pathologize or label. Similar to what I was saying on that first bullet point, we want to try and normalize the experiences that folks might have as it relates to depression, anxiety, and other things without it taking on the label of a disorder or a dysfunction, which sometimes can be the message that folks receive that might cause them to hide what's really going on with them. So normalizing help seeking, as we do for other preventative and proactive services, we're very good at reminding people that it's time to go and get your colorectal screening, that it's time to get your flu shot, that it's time to go to your PCP, and all of these other preventative measures. But when it comes to mental health and actually getting some mental health or substance use check-ins or quick evaluations, just to how am I doing? These can oftentimes go unsupported or really uncommunicated. And so I would say, as we think about how we're messaging that whole person care and encouraging people to take care of all of these other things as it relates to their physical body, that we're also including things that people can do to begin taking care and checking in with themselves around how they're doing mentally or emotionally, or how they're doing in their relationship with substances. Education is key. So top-down support from executive leadership down, supporting, reaching out for help for mental and emotional well-being, telling their own personal stories where those apply on how mental health or addiction has impacted them personally or in their circles, and encouraging people to talk about it without shame or embarrassment around it can be hugely successful. Mental health first aid for organizational leaders or even people-facing or people-managing roles that will help equip individuals to talk about mental health successfully in destigmatized ways, and also help them to know the right ways to intervene when someone is struggling or if someone is moving into a crisis can be very empowering to help one, start conversation about mental health within the workplace, but two, give people tools to actually know what to do about it if it were to come up in conversation. And active engagement and annual mental health awareness campaigns, so whether that's Mental Health Month or any of the other mental health or substance use related months or other campaigns, being very intentional to support those, present communications to the employees, participate in NAMI walks or whatever it might be, just to show that as an employer that you are supporting these things both with your employees and in the communities. And then time, allowing employees to access care during work hours when possible. And that's obvious, we let people go to the doctors, but I'm putting this in here because as care has moved more virtually, and particularly in behavioral health, maybe allowing folks to do a video session someplace at work in a private place where they would be able to do that safely. Allowing folks to take mental health days for themselves if they feel that that's necessary, and then making sure that in our communications and expectations that we're honoring that work-life balance that will help prevent folks from hitting a line potentially that might cause them to require a little bit additional service. And then we can go to the next slide. So lastly, and I'm not going to cover all of these programs here, but what I think is important to see in this slide is that it's important to have services and interventions around mental health and substance use that will resonate with individuals at different parts of the spectrum of need. So you can see on the left side, we have what we call low severity, or folks that are dealing with everyday life stressors, and ensuring that we have some tools to help support them in that, so that we're not trying to push them into things that might be more intensive than what they would actually require. So education tools, we talked about Learn to Live a moment ago. Then all the way towards the right-hand screen, where we start having services that are more targeted at those that have higher severity or higher acuity needs. And so there might be the crisis line, looking at the network for quick appointments or crisis appointments. We have the concierge that can help encourage folks or get folks into those virtual next day appointments at no cost. So there's some quick interventions there. And so that's kind of the message on this slide, and wanted to make sure I left some time for a question if there's a question.
Any questions for the Providence team? We do have time, so please don't hesitate to speak up.
Hey, Brian, as we're trying to gather to see if there's questions, I did want to point out just a couple of things to emphasize what Dustin just talked about. I think I included this in here. Just opportunities to appointments, that's still available. Again, same day, next day access to appointments. And you can see for PEBS utilization, it's really low. We've gotten probably 50 people a month that are using this service. And right now there's the capacity to support people on a same day, next day access basis. I also wanted to just point out here, I think I heard it on maybe Kaiser had mentioned having resources for the workplace, and Dustin also talked about how employers can help. We do have a toolkit that's available for HR and for employers that can assist them with having those conversations and building a workforce for supporting mental well-being. So I did want to include that, and I did include the QR code just to get directly to those resources. They are printable
And
in
Cash,
a PDF format, so anyone can use it.
I'm glad you brought up the toolkit, because that is the kind of one of the follow-up ideas I have for our follow-up discussion today, has to do with a toolkit and bringing the carriers and the canopy back together. Yeah, interestingly enough, I am already thinking kind of towards that direction and have some follow-up comments. Anyways, this is all good information. Again,
Yeah, and
any
lastly,
questions?
just
Oh, go
this
ahead.
right
Sorry.
here. Yeah, I was just gonna say lastly, this right here, sorry, Brian.
Oh, no, don't
Everyone, if you're a
apologize.
PEB member on Providence, you should see one of these in your mail in the next day or two. And it kind of speaks to what Dustin just talked about having, like around, let's see, here in this section, it talks about all the different themes for the month. So, like October being National Depression and Mental Health Screening Month, like all of those things, but then also incorporating that into prevention. So having that be part of a preventive discussion, not necessarily just an acuity or pathology discussion, to borrow Dustin's words. So just wanted to point those out as resources that we included in the slides. Sorry, Brian.
Oh, no, great. I appreciate it. I think we've heard a lot of great information today. And again, let me first check any questions for the Providence team?
Brian, this is Teresa. I do see one from Lindsay, and it speaks to a question I had, because all of these slides that Cash and her team have been sharing have at the very bottom a private and confidential. So we're wondering if the slides will be available to the folks in this group.
We did. I'm
Yes,
pretty
and
sure we
that,
did. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, I was just going to say that's only on there so you don't take it and just start putting it on Twitter.
I do believe we provided the presentation materials in PDF format that Rebecca emailed meeting invitees all of that information earlier this week. But if you don't see all of the presentation emails, let us know. Certainly we'll round up some information and can provide additional information following the meeting.
So this is Rebecca. Teresa, I'm just looking at an email you sent me a few weeks back. So everybody should have gotten the slides, but I see that you added Lindsay to the Worksite Wellness Coordinating Council, and I did not add her. So I'll send them her the slides.
Oh, thank you, Rebecca.
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks, Rebecca. Okay, well, thank you to the Providence team. I think like the other presentations we heard today, there is a lot to unpack. And with the little time we have remaining, let me first off again and say thank you to our partners for taking the time to present and to discuss all this with us. I am sure we'll be in touch relatively soon on next steps and future presentations. I wanted to open it up really quick. Does the committee or any other invitees, are there any general impressions or kind of immediate thoughts that struck you following these presentations? And I do have a couple comments I can share if folks don't have much to share at this point, but let me open it up.
So Brian, this is Gayla. So I guess as a person who's been training lots of people on information about Canopy and doing making articles into newsletters, I have often thought, hey, wouldn't it be great, and maybe this is sort of the toolkit idea, but wouldn't it be great if no matter what the topic, if it was, we were going to be getting information about diabetes, well, some kind of information that would be available that an agency could just take, and here's, don't forget your benefits, and boom, 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 there it is. And so that it would be really just a great way to get information out. And so anyway, that's kind of what I have often thought would be great to be able to then include in a really easy way that information about people's benefits. No matter what the topic, if it was behavioral health or whatever, just some more information about the programs would be really great.
Perfect. And then we have another hand raised. Let's see, Emily.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Wow, this was really incredible information. A lot to digest and unpack. And I'm just thinking outside of the box. I love how we asked this question about how to destigmatize. So I'm just thinking about, I used to work at the Minnesota Department of Health many years ago in the Office of Minority Multicultural Health. I was the Asian Health Coordinator there. And in Minnesota, they had the largest Hmong population in the country. And most of that population was refugee versus immigrant. And mental health was heavily stigmatized. And so one of the things that they did, St. Paul Public Schools, which had over 60% at the time of Hmong students, they decided to do just a school-wide intervention so that, no one single youth or family would be singled out, kind of like, everybody could benefit, from having this type of information. So, I'm struck by, the workforce challenges and how we don't currently have, and it's not just behavioral health, like many have said, it's also physical health workforce. It's not as diverse as the patients that we're trying to serve in terms of race, ethnicity, language, cultural knowledge. And so, here is our current state, here's our future state that we're trying to get to. And then how can we all work together outside of the box, to fill those gaps, or just, I know from people's comments from the presentations that many of you are aware of the once in a generation investments in behavioral health that Oregon has, done within the last couple ledge sessions. That's long overdue, but you can't go from 0 to 100, within so quickly. And so kind of what are those interim steps to get us there? I mean, it's a huge challenge.
Yeah, and all good points. I during these presentations have been thinking again how to deliver this type of information to employees and managers in a way that will work better for them, or just maybe will grab their attention differently. And one thing I jotted down, I heard multiple people say language matters when discussing behavioral health and talking about what's available. And it reminded me that, Canopy has developed a great toolkit with a lot of stuff for HRs and managers. And Providence just shared they have an HR toolkit as well. But I wonder, I can't recall the Canopy toolkit having maybe a work product or document or something that actually is instructions and talking points for how people can facilitate like a 15-minute meeting on well-being and resources using the right language and terminology. And actually, in my mind, it'd be intended not for upper executive level managers, although we could provide it to them, but I'm thinking team leads, project leads, lead staff, lower level managers. And I'm just wondering if, and I'm assuming that package isn't already created. Maybe there's already pieces of it, based in what Canopy's already done. But I'm wondering if just writing a script that someone could use to facilitate a meeting with staff and with team members who are also PEB members, and really just telling them, how do you even introduce the subject? Here's a script. Maybe, and again, it would be something that I think we would coordinate with Canopy and the medical carriers, because I think that script would include, here's the resources for these issues, maybe here's a video, but something that we could condense into a document that would help, like me, hold a meeting for, for my staff and colleagues that I work with to introduce the subject. So those are just my thoughts. Again, language matters, right? So I'm not sure how I would have this conversation with employees, or how I would kick it off. I personally feel comfortable doing that, but I imagine for a lot of people, it'd be good to have a script and kind of a scripted 15-minute meeting with video resources and like, hey, here's how you could bring this up to your staff. And maybe it's something where, if you're interested in using this, consider maybe doing it, maybe one time during the year when things are quiet with your team or the project team, when people have time to reflect, and intentionally maybe present it another time during a peak period when people are maybe feeling more stressed and need immediate, assistance. So again, that's just thinking off the cuff today. I think it's something, again, we could follow up with Canopy to find out, based on what they've developed so far, is there room to maybe partner with them and the carriers to create, an additional document that be provided to folks. So anyways, any comments from committee members, or I see Umberto, and the carriers? Any thoughts? Is this stuff already created? And I see Dave, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I'm happy to respond to that idea, and we definitely welcome more collaboration. One of the ways that we tackle this is on an educational basis, and I know we're in a unique position to do that. It's included in all of our contracts with the different agencies and organizations. And there are supervisor tools, supervisor workshops available in addition to supervisor communications that go out. So those, I think there are definitely some ways that we could build off of the existing tools. I also always like to remind our member groups that an underutilized tool is our unlimited management consultations. So managers, supervisors can call up anytime and talk with our clinical staff. So there's nothing like getting the ear of a counselor for 15 or 20 minutes to talk through a workplace situation, whether it's how to make a referral, how to use destigmatizing language. We have those conversations frequently, but I love your idea, Brian, of how do we expand on that? Because not everybody takes us up on the workshops, trainings, and consultations.
Yeah, and again, I'd be open to hearing if folks think there's value there, because again, we have a lot of managers, a lot of staff around the state, and my thinking is just to do some of the work for them on how to script and talk about it. And again, I don't know if that'd move the needle, but I think we're in a position where we might as well try. And I know, Dave, you guys have already created a lot of great stuff. So it's something where I don't think we necessarily want to recreate the wheel. It's maybe just a slightly different audience and different spin on it.
Sure. Yeah, we always want to put stuff out there that's useful and targeting what we want to hit, right? So yes, let's definitely collaborate.
Okay. Any other thoughts, Teresa?
Oh, I just stuck it in the chat there that we were talking about a toolkit with scripts that the Department of Corrections did create one a few years ago. I'm looking at it right now that actually has things a manager can say to an employee without prying, without, making the employee feel comfortable, like they're being grilled or wanting to know what their diagnosis is. Why are you out ill so much? But it's a way to open a conversation and to kind of direct folks to, I want you to know that you've got benefits and you've got supports here to help you, and here's where you can find them.
Yeah, and based on my observations, it feels like we spend so much focus on the top down, and that's important. Workplace culture support, I mean, that's a critical part of moving this forward. But also struck me that there's so many staff level and lower level management positions that probably work directly with employees more, know employees on a more personal level. And there's no reason why we couldn't arm them with this information and see if there could be success in them having these conversations, not at higher level management meetings, but even project meetings,
The corrections even developed a cadre of, I forget the title that they're calling them. They're not health champions, but they are mentors. They're calling them mentors. So it's employee to employee conversations that might feel a little more comfortable than a manager to an employee about health and mental health supports.
Yeah, and I think it has to be manageable. So if we just send them a 50-page document, it's not going to fly, So that, I think that's the tricky part. So we're down to 5 minutes. I would like to open it up. Any other thoughts or comments?
Brian, this is Stephen. And I haven't found out how I can raise my hand, so I'm just going to jump right in.
You can raise your hand on camera. That'll suffice.
I'll raise my hand. So I'll just remind us all that we're about to go into well-being strategy development, and well-being encompasses physical, mental, spiritual, financial, social, other dimensions. And it seems that this discussion today and the services that our provider partners have to offer, as well as what we can do as an organization culturally. Dave mentioned some of those things earlier. And to me, to summarize everything that I see for this situation is we have two major areas of focus. What services and resources are available for people to use when they're ready to use them and seeking them. And that's probably some navigational support that's complicated by the fact that there are multiple providers of that. But then there's also, and this reflects what we know from Hero Scorecard research that we've done on the best practices for health and well-being initiative success. And the number one best practice is organizational and leadership support. So those things that David already mentioned and others that relate to how we can build the culture. I'm bringing that all back to us because we're two groups, a combined group now of PMAC and the council, who are wanting to ask ourselves, what can we do to help facilitate this? So I think at the end of the day, that's where we need to come to, and hopefully the well-being strategy will be one of the vehicles to get there, and the tactical roadmap of what actually to do to affect that are things that we can work on as we move forward here. So just wanted to sort of infuse that into the conversation.
I appreciate it. And Stephen, we can, ideas like these, I think for you, Teresa, and the Mercer team and Sharna can get back together offline and figure out where do these ideas reside? Where should they be explored? The strategy work group, PMAC, the coordinating council. Thank you for your comments. So in closing, again, thank you for all of our partners for the great information. I knew kind of all of this information would be hard to come up with action items right away because it's a lot to digest and think about. So I think I'll work with Teresa, Sharna, Rebecca, and the Mercer team offline to come up with ideas kind of for our next step and next meeting. Just as an FYI, so we will next convene for the November meeting. And I will again work with staff in Mercer to figure out what that may look like. And we may decide if we need another month to pull some more work together for another good meeting like this in December, we may end up canceling it. But again, I think first we'll chat offline and figure out how we can try to take all this information and come up with some action items and follow-up items. Teresa will also be facilitating a Worksite Wellness Coordinating Council meeting at the beginning of December. And just as a reminder, that meeting may include some updated information regarding the canopy renewal proposals that will eventually go to the board. This was part of PMAC's and the Coordinating Council's recommendations to move forward. So there may be information like different service level options, maybe addition of hours agencies can use for certain purposes, that sort of thing. And then ultimately, and again, as Stephen mentioned, we're getting the strategy work group off the ground that will commence, I believe, early November. I believe we did have 1 or 2 volunteers during this meeting from PMAC, so thank you. We'll be in touch. And then again, in December, we'll come back for the PMAC meeting, and that'll be largely, the agenda will largely be driven by kind of the offline discussions that we have with Mercer following this and the Worksite Wellness Coordinating Council meeting as well. So a lot of moving parts. We'll take it offline, figure it out. And what I'll do is I'll reach out to the committee if I have any questions or need direction. And if not, you can wait to hear from some additional updates from us. If you have ideas on proposals or action items, email them directly to Teresa, Rebecca, or myself, and we'll figure out how to incorporate them into our discussions with Mercer. So with that said, any final thoughts for the good of the order? Okay. Thanks again, everyone. Be well. Have a great, relaxing and restful afternoon, and take care.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
See ya.